It's another wild day in the world of Magic the Gathering. There has just been a massive leak, but not of the set that's coming out in a couple of weeks. No. Of a set that's coming out next year. Phyrexia All Will Be One just got leaked.
Magic. I am a wizard! History. I'm an old wizard! The Magic Historian. My bones hurt.
Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. My friends, I hope the day finds you well because we have gathered for an absolutely insane situation. We are right on the cusp of Brothers War spoiler season. So you'd think if there was going to be a leak of cards, it would come from that set. But no, instead, we have a leak from the upcoming Phyrexia All Will Be One set. And I don't just mean one card. There's a bunch of cards, a whole bunch of information to learn about this set. It's absolutely wild. And on top of that, this leak seems very genuine. This is not some blurry picture nonsense, and it wasn't posted by some brand new, we've never heard of it Reddit account. All indicators say this stuff is very real. So, my friends, let's go take a look. We're starting out with Sinew Dancer, and this card all by itself tells us a ton of what we can expect to see in the upcoming Phyrexia All Will Be One set. It's 1 white mana for a 1/1 common Phyrexian soldier. And I'm so stoked to see that Phyrexian is now a regular creature type that we can expect to see on creatures going forwards. So this is really just your standard level draft common when you look at its first ability. 1 white and 3, tap it, tap target creature. We see this ability all over the place in different variations. But where it gets really interesting is when you move down to the next ability, which is Corrupted, pay only 1 white and tap target creature. But you can only activate that if your opponent has 3 or more poison counters. Now, obviously, having to only pay 1 mana to tap down a creature is pretty strong. But the more interesting part of this is the fact that this lets us know that not only is poison back, but it's back in a big way. They're not going to make draft level commons that care about your opponent having 3 poison counters on them unless there are significant poison counters to go around. And on top of that, the flavor concept behind the corrupted keyword is absolutely great. Phyrexia wants to infect everybody, right? Get that glistening oil on you, give you that fire until you are completed. So the idea that you infect your opponents and then you gain sway over them and it's easier to manipulate them is really on point. This feels really solid for a draft common, and on top of that, the flavor of the card overall is awesome. The Sinew Dancer is clearly devoted to Elesh Norn. Take a look at his head. He has a smaller one of those crazy bone plate heads. And you know when you look at Elesh Norn, she has that sort of gory red undertone to her pure whiteness. Well, if this artwork wasn't rendered in this black and white styling, then that's what we would see here. This would be all bright, vivid red extending out from him. It's pretty amazing conceptually. And the flavor text says, to resist the embrace of the flesh singularity is to reject unconditional acceptance. Now, if you're somebody who cares about the story and does not want storyline spoilers, this is your opportunity to leave the video, because from this point on, we are going to be getting into some genuine story spoilers and some speculation as well based on the flavor text from these cards. All right, so opportunity to go now. Now we move on. So, Sinew Dancer, here's how it works. The idea with the flavor text behind the flesh singularity is Elesh Norn has this crazy plan to take over the entire multiverse. If you listen to the story over on Fantasy Geographic talking about Dominaria United, at the very end of that story, what happens is Elesh Norn shows Karn this tiny little sapling that's growing, and she tells him that's the future. that sapling is going to grow up to be a massive realm breaker tree that actually reaches out into all of the different planes so the Phyrexians can invade and take over the entire multiverse. And not just that, but Elish Norn intends to unite everyone together as one gigantic Phyrexian being, otherwise known as the Flesh Singularity. So you have this situation where Elish Norn is pushing out to try and take over everything, and it's going to get absolutely wild. And speaking of wild, another thing you've probably noticed that I haven't addressed yet are the crazy Phyrexian symbols that are stamped all over this card. Well, this is the equivalent of a galaxy foil from the Unfinity set, but far, far cooler because it evokes Phyrexia. So when you take a look at Sinu Dancer, what we're actually seeing is a showcase version of a card with the most special version of foiling. So these will be the most chase versions of these cards. You'll have regular foils, and then you will have these, I don't know what they're going to call them, probably completed foils. That's something cool along those lines. But this isn't the only card we have to talk about. So let's move on to an interesting reprint in the form of Thrumming Bird. So Thrumming Bird is 1 blue and 1 for a 1/1 flyer, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. And that basically lets you add a counter to everything that has a counter that you want to add a counter to, including players. So it's a nice little ability. Honestly, Thrumming Bird was great the first time around, and looking at this one, I don't know exactly what you would call the concept of art here. Is it like some sort of like shadow deconstruction? I don't know if we're going to get a regular version of this artwork that is different, or if it's just going to be this artwork with more details. But I find this kind of like toned down, the artwork, I guess what it is it feels like there's a lot of negative space around them because there's not that much in the background, when normally Magic cards have a ton going on in the background as well. So it does give an interesting singular focus. And Thrumming Bird is much cooler as a Phyrexian bird horror. Again, adding in the Phyrexian creature type was a great move to make. But this isn't a new card, so it doesn't really add that much in terms of excitement and new mechanics. So let us move on to another card. We're going to take a look at Quicksilver Fisher. This is 2 blue and 3 for a 4/3 Phyrexian Drake. And you'll notice that there's a theme. We are seeing everything is a Phyrexian, not a single non-Phyrexian creature so far. Now, when Quicksilver Fisher enters the battlefield, draw a card, then discard a card. Very standard. Again, this is a draft chaff style card. Ultimately, in a draft, it will be a beefy boy because it can fly in for 4 and you'll curse it. But outside of it, this card will see play nowhere, which is unfortunate. That is one of the tragedies of Magic, is there is a lot of awesome artwork and concepts that just end up as draft chaff, and we all kind of psychologically throw those cards on the bin and go, who cares about them, without appreciating all the work that the artist put into them a lot of the time, right? So that is unfortunate, but regardless, let's move on to the flavor text. Phyrexia will stretch from sea to sky, across worlds and realities, inescapable and perfect. Now I want you to notice now this theme is carried across white and blue now. We have both of these colors essentially saying that everything belongs to Phyrexia. All will be united. So you can see Phyrexia has the skies in the form of Thrumming Birds, Quicksilver Fishers. Sinu Dancer is literally like hooked up and could be just manipulating people, but it gets even more interesting when we move into red. So the first card that we get in red is Furnace Punisher. It's 1 red and 2 for a 3/3 Phyrexian warrior with menace. It says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, Furnace Punisher deals 2 damage to that player unless they control 2 or more basic lands. This is a very strange ability that makes it feel like the set may be crammed with a bunch of non-basic lands. Maybe we're going to see more artifact lands coming back at this point. Who knows? The original artifact lands were considered a mistake, but at the same time, Wizards of the Coast did go ahead and cram a bunch into Modern Horizons 2. So it's actually kind of difficult to determine. It's a fascinating ability because you think about it in most draft scenarios, you're going to go, wait a minute, your opponent has to have 2 or more basic lands, and that's all it takes to shut this damage off. That feels really weak on the surface. Like, obviously, you're not going to play this in most formats, right? It's a 3/3 menace, which is okay and like limited, but ultimately that ability screams something nutty is going to be going on with the land bases in this set, and I do like it when things get wild and crazy. The artwork depicts a Phyrexian warrior standing there with what looks like a gigantic blade arm. It's pretty intense. He's just cradling it. Now, the flavor text says, "Etch your victories in iron, that the world may celebrate them forever." Now, this is interesting to me because it feels like a departure from the flavor text that we've already seen. The other ones basically speak of everything belonging to Phyrexia, but this is particularly singular, right? Etch your victories in iron, that the world may celebrate them forever. So it's very much separating you from the world as a concept. And that's interesting to me when you combine it with the next card we're going to talk about, which is Sawblade Scamp. So this is 1 red for a 1/1 Phyrexian beast. It has haste. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Sawblade Scamp. Then you can tap, remove an oil counter from Sawblade Scamp. It deals 1 damage to each opponent. So ultimately, this is an interesting little card in that it's a 1/1 for 1 with haste, which is okay when you're playing Red Rush and you want to get in there. But usually what happens with these things is they run out of gas. People put out bigger creatures. Even a 2/2 is enough to stop the damage train. So in that case, you have the second ability of whenever you're casting things that aren't creatures, he's storing up oil counters, and then you can remove those oil counters to do damage to your opponent directly. So he has more versatility, and I like the fact that you can use that ability right when you play him because he has haste. The flavor on it is pretty funky in terms of the artwork. It looks like a lizard beast with a massive saw blade back, but the flavor text is what's really interesting to me because it says, "Be the blade that severs hierarchy." So it's basically saying, cut down the leadership, sort out a new world, free yourself. That's the idea it's giving me, and it's very much at odds with the rest of the flavor that's being presented, including what we've seen elsewhere about Elesh Norn's plans, because Elesh Norn expects Phyrexia to march in lockstep with her, and we've seen that almost all of Phyrexia does. 4 of the Praetors are working together, but the red one, Urabrask, he's fiercely independent, and while he believes that Phyrexia should rule, he doesn't believe that Phyrexia should be one unified concept, and there can be different ideas for it. And as a result, he's essentially fomenting a rebellion. We saw elements of this being laid back in the streets of New Capenhasset. You may not remember because it really did feel tacked onto the story, but he did travel through the planar gate, working with Tezzeret to meet up with Vivian to get his hands on some Halo and then return back to New Phyrexia. So it is entirely possible that he is essentially going to be on the side of good that is fighting back against Elesh Norn and the Flesh Singularity because he doesn't want him and the rest of his minions to be subsumed. You'll remember, or perhaps don't remember, back in the days of the original Phyrexian invasion on Mirrodin, when a bunch of survivors fled to the inner furnaces, Urabrask said, "Let them be, allow them to remain." He didn't have them completed, and he didn't have them destroyed. And there's also the fact that we haven't seen the Planeswalker Koth in a long time. So we might be seeing him very soon. Ultimately, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on with these spoilers, and we actually have a few more card fragments that give us a tiny bit more to get excited about. So we've got Blightbelly and Mere Convert, just card fragments though. So they both have Toxic 1. Now, most likely, Toxic 1 is our new poison mechanic. In the previous iteration of poison, they used Infect for Phyrexian creatures, but Infect turned out to be too strong because it gives poison counters equal to the amount of damage the creature is doing. And it's too easy to use pump spells to boost creatures' power so you can get an easy win using poison counters. So in this case, Wizard is going to limit it with something like Toxic 1, where no matter how strong the creature is, it only gives you one poison counter. And it makes sense. These two cards are most likely common since all we've seen are commons. Toxic 1 is a relatively low number, but at the same time, if you have a bunch of Toxic 1 creatures, it won't take that many to get through and get the 3 poison counters to activate Corrupted. And we also don't know if Corrupted automatically requires 3 poison counters, or if different creatures have different requirement levels of poison counters to consider the opponent corrupted. It is an interesting variance possibility. I do like everything that we've seen here in terms of exciting me. And on top of that, if you guys didn't know this, let's take a look at the original picture of Sinew Dancer for a second, but we're going to enhance in the back corner. If you take a look, that looks like a big fat stack of magic cards. So it looks like the guy who spoiled these actually has a bunch more to leak. I imagine we're in for one bumpy ride. It's going to be a good time. So thanks to all of my patrons for supporting my channel. If you guys don't know the story leading up to this, you're going to want to know the Brothers War story. You're going to want to know the Dominaria United story. Lucky for you, I've actually recorded videos on all of them. And I'll tell you the story so you don't even have to read it yourself. Head on over to Fantasy Geographic, the link up on the screen, and check it out. Or watch the video about me getting replaced over on my other channel. It's an insane situation. Either way, I'll see you there.